Hey guys, Greg from FactionFab. In this video, we're going to be tackling the suspension on our 2008 STI. Now the STI really has a pretty good suspension, it's fairly comfortable, and it's a huge step up from a stock WRX, but there is still a lot of room for improvement. Number one, there's a lot of wheel gap. If I want this car to look good or aggressive by any sort, it definitely needs to be lowered a little bit. And number two, like I said, it's fairly comfortable and somewhat sporty, but there is definitely times when I want it to be a lot more stable and less pitch, dive, all that stuff. So we're gonna be taking this car and getting some video, putting it through a series of tests to show you some of the differences between stock, lowering springs, and coilovers. So the first test we're gonna go through is gonna be a basic cornering test. We're gonna have a couple cameras set up and we're gonna take a corner and you'll be able to see the body roll and then also overall grip and stability in the corner. The next test we're going to go through is a basic pitch and dive test. We're gonna set up the camera to the side of the car and then do a couple hard accelerations and hard braking so you can see the difference between the front and rear as it lifts. So we're here in the shop getting ready to install the lowering springs on this STI. The first thing, we're gonna talk about how much it's gonna lower the car. These are set up to lower 1 inch in the front and 0.8 inch in the rear. So it's kind of on the moderate side as far as lowering the car goes. You're not gonna be extreme, but you are gonna see a little bit of a difference. And that is the spec that is the same across all the FactionFab lineup. Now we're also going to see a bump up in the spring rate. Subaru says the stock springs on this car are 217 pounds per inch in the front and 194 pounds per inch in the rear. Now the FactionFab ones are going to be 320 in front and rear, which is slightly more aggressive. Now we already have a video on how to install the lowering springs. I'll put a link up here in the top corner for you if you want to check that out. So we're just going to do a quick time lapse of me installing the springs on this car. Let's go get started. Lowering springs can get a bad rap due to a limited window of performance you can attain on a non-adjustable stock style strut. Coilovers are often recommended due to their more aggressive and adjustable damping, which enables you to add much stiffer springs and gain better performance. But the thing is that our lowering springs were never meant to compete with coilovers, rather fill a gap between a stock car and a race car. Coilovers compromise comfort in exchange for performance, where lowering springs, if done correctly to match the valving of the stock struts, can offer an alternative, lowering the car and adding a smaller increase in performance while keeping an almost stock level of comfort. So I'm just getting ready to install the wheel spacer on this STI. We're going with a 20 millimeter. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to answer a common question that we get. And that question is, how thick of a spacer do we need to clear the stock studs? You can see if I put this spacer on, this does stick out about 4 millimeters past the edge of the spacer. So what you need to do is you need to check your wheel. See, this wheel here has pockets on the back of the wheel that these studs can stick out into the wheel, so that way we're not going to worry about any problems. So if you're ever doing a smaller bolt-on spacer, you'll want to make sure you check your wheels to see how much room you have on the back side of the wheel to see if it's going to fit. And that can be done pretty easy if you have a ruler or a set of digital calipers, something just to test that depth, and then you check your wheel as well. The new ride height is right on target, and with the wheel spacers on, it looks fantastic. These lowering springs are perfect for someone who wants a set it and forget it answer to their suspension. For the person who drives their car to work every day, to the store, on road trips, and they want it to look good while doing it. The style is reminiscent of some of Subaru's special edition S-Line cars, where they just add a little touch of performance with bringing down parts from the racing homologation line to make a premium option for the streets. Style takes the front seat with this mod, but we also want to make sure it can still do stuff like this. So let's talk about some of the driving impressions now that we've had the Springs on for a while. As far as daily driving, there's really not much of a difference. Small bumps, medium bumps, it's pretty comfortable. Pretty close to stock. I haven't had to worry about being super low on any curbs or speed bumps or anything like that. It's really been a pretty easy transition, and I think if someone didn't know any better, they wouldn't even realize there's been a big change made as far as actual driving on the street. And as far as driving in the corners, well, that's what we're going to show you now. All right, so we're just coming up to this curve from the top. Talk about this curve, it's gonna be a downhill right turn. So since it's downhill, this is a really easy spot to maintain a constant speed without needing any throttle input, which is gonna give us a really stable look at what the suspension is doing under load. So I'm gonna come in at about 40 miles an hour. That's about where this turn can handle before I start to lose any tire traction. It's really close, but it's, like I say, we can still get full grip around the corner. And I just keep it in second gear, let off the throttle, and then we go around, and it is super stable through the corners. Honestly, even stock handled a corner like that pretty well. It gives it time to really set itself up, and the aftermarket Springs handle it just the same. There's really no big difference. And now we're going to turn around and go up the hill. Now this is one of the areas where I thought was a little bit of a shortcoming with the stock Springs. I noticed with this car especially, there's a big change in steering versus load and offload. I wouldn't call it torque steering necessarily that you'd get in like a front wheel drive car, but as you have the weight shift to the back of the car, the front end just becomes a little bit lighter. So this turn, we're going to accelerate up the hill, making the left turn, not necessarily coming into the turn at speed, but accelerating through so we can see that change in steering and really feel the difference when I'm under throttle. So we're coming in, and I'm just going to get about 25 miles an hour and right about 3,000 RPMs in second gear. And then I throw in the throttle and I go. And again, it just feels significantly better than stock. The rear end doesn't squat too much. The weight stays stable in the front and the rear, and I don't feel like I lose any steering at all. So it's a very big difference. So this next test, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, is a hard acceleration and braking test. This is mostly going to be applicable to your daily drive. You know, everyone's going to be in traffic, stops, starts, lights, everything. But even on a track, you know, hard braking coming into a corner, you want to make sure your car is stable. And if you're drag racing, you want a hard dig coming off the line. Those are going to be the times when you're most likely to lose control. So we're going to see what we can do to just push the limits of the hard braking and acceleration so you can see how this suspension handles that abrupt change. So I'm going to start coming down this straight at about 50 miles an hour. I have a marker to tell me where I want to hit the brakes, and then hopefully I'll come to a stop right in front of the camera. So you'll be able to see that hard dip in the front end. So the idea here, how suspension helps, is it's going to keep all four wheels more planted on the ground. If the front end dives, that's going to send more weight to the front of the car, which puts more stress on your front tires. Whereas you can keep that weight stable, the rear tires are going to take some of that braking force as well, which is going to give you a shorter stopping distance and a more stable period while you're in that braking zone. The second half of this test is going to be our acceleration. So we decided it would be best to show this test by starting out in first gear rolling at about 3,000 RPMs. That way, when I hit the pedal, we'll already be in full boost, and you should be able to see a dramatic lift of the front end, and then also be able to catch the shift between first and second, where you might see that drop and then lift again. So that same goal also applies to this acceleration as it did to the braking. We want to keep the weight evenly distributed between all four tires, and that's going to enable you to accelerate faster and be more under control during the acceleration. So some final points before we put a pause on this video. I really like these lowering springs. Like I said earlier, they're not really meant to compete with coilovers. They're not meant to be an aggressive track setup. But what they do really well. They're inexpensive, they're easy, and they just work. But we're not done here yet, because this car is probably going to see some track duty. Definitely some more aggressive driving, and we're definitely going to want to play with some of the other features that coilovers have to offer. So stay tuned for part 2 of the video, where we take the coilovers through all the same tests that we did for these lowering springs, and we may even get a little crazy. So stay tuned, like and subscribe to follow this build series, and we will see you next time. Bye.